So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Just because on the previous session I used Stevie Wonder's music a little bit, and then during the coffee break, somebody came to me, approached to me, and used another song, and we make some joke. So this person approached me, used the I Need a Fire. I Need a Fire. The Stevie Wonder song says, I need some gas. So yes, this is a session for gas. I'll give you what you want. So we will now focus on one of our most promising solutions to address vessel emissions, and one that we can start immediately. Use of LNG as an environmentally superior marine fuel. The last panel of YMF 2019 gathers probably the best experts on this topic. Our moderator is a man with unparalleled experience in the shipping industry, spanning more than half a century. He is a mentor to many, and now fills a critical leadership role in promoting the use of LNG. He's a founding chairman of CRNG, a London-based international organization promoting the use of LNG as marine fuel. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in a warm welcome to Mr. Peter Keller and his panel. Peter, the floor is yours.
And I will take the floor only very briefly to introduce our first speaker, who's going to talk about the investment case for liquefied natural gas, and that's John Hatley, who's Vice President of Wartsila. John has over 35 years in the business. He comes out of Kings Point, which is the Merchant Marine Academy of the United States, and our paths unknowingly crossed a number of times because, among other things, John was as a young cadet, not as a cadet, as a young graduate, was an engineer on the SL-7s, which were the 33-knot sea-land container ships that operated many, many years ago and are now in the hands of the United States government. And John was also at an event that I unfortunately was in charge of, which was the inaugural sailing or the inaugural arrival in Port Elizabeth of an SL-7. Which arrived 4 hours late, which takes us back to our discussion of reliability, even at 33 knots. But John was in the band, the Kings Point band. So our paths have crossed. John's an extremely knowledgeable individual. He has a degree in naval architecture as well as his degree from Kings Point, and is also has an MBA. So when we talk about the investment case, we talk about what's going on with LNG and the possibilities going forward. John is an expert in that area and has been extremely important to CLNG. So with that, John.
Honored guests, ladies and gentlemen. Howdy from Houston. It's my honor and privilege to be a speaker here today on behalf of Wartsila, and we warmly celebrate the 160th anniversary for Yokohama, and I'm very privileged and honored to be here for this opportunity to address all of you. Pacific trades, dilemmas. Which ship fuel for competitive advantage post-2020? Our agenda: what, why, how, some business cases and conclusions. To begin, the industry faces a commodity play. And if you can imagine, for the past century, ships plied the oceans while owners faced a simple single choice: consume residual fuels as all others and efficiently compete on the basis of the best operations for strategies. But today, the single fuel mantra has morphed into a multitude of fuel alternatives, all which represent a commodity play on future energy costs. What fuel strategy will boost my bottom line while assuring compliance with ever stricter emission requirements? It's truly a competitive opportunity. Why? Where are the structural shifts and competitive changes occurring in the industry? They come from many sources. Yes, it's a challenging time for shipping. As ships last decades, whereas the pace of change is accelerating across a broad range of threats and looming opportunities. Defensive technologies shield fuels that are today falling out of favor. There's new technologies which advance possibilities. All of these bring choices as to where is the right adoption that yields strategic advantage across environmental, economic, political, and technical areas. Historically, there were 5 dominant market forces: suppliers, buyers, substitute products, and new entrants, all circled around the rivalry amongst sellers. But there is now a 6th strong force, the red circle: government legislation. Think, for centuries, governments exercised their political power to influence markets on trade behavior and thereby protect or preserve key industries. Today it's changed. Governments now exert influence on emissions through regulations that reflect the popular views of their populations for a cleaner planet. The world has reacted, and a global watershed occurred in December of 2015 with the Paris Accord. Soon thereafter, the IMO Maritime and Environmental Protection Committee agreed on initial strategic roadmaps to reduce CO2 emissions by 50% by 2050 and other measures to strengthen the Energy Design Index. This continued, and as we've heard earlier, additional reductions are coming soon and fast so that we can reach a 50% overall goal by 2050. There will be revisions and much more to come. And we've also seen in this simple mapping that regulations beget more regulations with more to come. How? The IMO sulfur cap, disruption, chaos. Key subjects we're going to look at are regional air quality and global greenhouse gas warming trends. The annual marine fuel consumption has several expert estimates, but the average is about 6 million barrels per day of fuel consumed by the world's merchant fleet. Look at the profound impacts of the 1 January 2020 when the MGO and light sulfur fuel oil ban doubles from 1.9 to nearly 3.7 million barrels per day. This disruptive chaos with the shift from HFO to MGO and light sulfur fuel oil means the markets globally and regionally will encounter extreme volatility exhibited on availability and prices. Some of that volatility we can see in the forward curves for the spread between fuels going forward. It may be as much as $200 to $300 a ton. But the experts have a range of opinions, and it's great uncertainty. Remember that certainty and clarity breeds investments, whereas uncertainty causes dislocation of funds into other opportunities. Regional air emissions are very important to recall and understand what happens with the combustion process. Regional air quality is impacted by NOx, SOx, PM, and soot, whereas global warming is essentially CO2. But it's regional air quality that is too often ignored in today's conversations, where there's a strong focus unilaterally placed on global warming. It's key to remember the importance of regional air quality concerns for the very large populations that reside adjacent to our congested, busy ports. Low carbon fuels, such as LNG, improves air quality regionally for better human health. Greenhouse gas. ThinkStep produced a definitive study earlier this year on greenhouse gas that for the first time utilized real engine data for realistic results, encompassing methane slip and fugitive emissions, covering from well to wake, well to tank, and tank to wake. It has just now been chosen as a standard reference at the IMO. And more specifically in that report, it shows significant reductions in CO2 are available now with LNG-fueled vessels, with significant reductions. But it's the business case that's important, both measured in investment terms traditionally, as well as environmental returns. Let's look at a couple of examples. CLNG has produced two key business cases: a 14,000 TEU container ship in the North Pacific trades to the U.S. West Coast, and pure car truck carriers transiting the Pacific, and another case in that same report for the Atlantic. For business case details on these lengthy reports, you may visit the CLNG website. But to brief you on those reports, there were 6 fuel forecasts that the consulting firm used to evaluate considerations across these alternatives. Business as usual, tight distillates, various economies of scale or improvements, tight traditional fuels, or stranded fuels. And the stranded fuels case is shown here, where the green line indicates a potential plummet in high sulfur fuels as we abruptly shift on January 1, 2020 towards 0.5% compliant fuels worldwide, and others 0.1% for those in the emissions control areas. There is also a slow price recovery as refineries reconfigure and market rebalancing occurs. However, risks abound, both on the pricing side and an availability, or the sourcing capability side, with additional scrubber technical acceptance concerns at several global ports as we go forward. The trade, familiar to Japan with its exports to the U.S. West Coast, where goods flow with high capacities eastbound and lesser westbound. The CapEx summary, and here we show costs amongst the alternatives where LNG is configured using two-stroke engines versus an open-loop scrubber versus compliant fuels. The results. Under strong freight markets with elevated speeds, LNG provides tens of millions of dollars of wealth gain today. Tens of millions of dollars. Across several of the compliant fuel forecasts, and only one spot is at below the line for the stranded fuels scrubber situation, which has risks. Under weak freight markets with a vessel running slower, the values mitigate down slightly, but still tremendous advantage for LNG fuel in the tens of millions of dollars. What about the car exports and significant trade volumes that Japan provides in the North Pacific trades? We analyzed an 8,000 car capacity carrier from Japan to the U.S. West Coast. Again, its CapEx details are shown here. Please study the report. We can find that the vessel, again, shows tens of millions of dollars of investment returns against compliant conventional fuels across all 6 fuel forecasts, and only in one minor instance with risk does the scrubber seem to win out. But that's not enough. What if your forecast is different than the 6 fuel forecasts of our consulting firm? We created the reader's choice. You, as the reader of this report, can utilize this chart and enter in on the horizontal axis with your desired high sulfur fuel and scrubber price, dollars per ton, or conventional very low sulfur fuel oil, dollars per ton. Proceed up to the diagonal line and then read across the equivalent price for LNG so that the entire investment case is neutral. And that gives you perspective, because now you can understand the balance between what your fuel prices are in your scenario and what LNG would have to be priced at to work or not work. But that's not all. Environmental greenhouse gas benefits are also extremely important as environmental currency. Brand is a major importance to the car makers, as their positioning on environmental sustainability is captured by the views of the car buying public. Knowing that, then the greenhouse gas emissions becomes a very key metric for fuel choice. We can see here that there's almost 200,000 tons of CO2 saved by the 2 alternatives on natural gas compared to with a scrubber or with compliant fuel. 200,000 tons of CO2. Values run from $20 to $100 a ton assessments by different groups. At $50 midpoint, that is $10 million of additional wealth gain to be added into the investment model. So the takeaways are LNG for common ships and typical trades. We've shown a very strong investment traditional return in the millions of wealth gain and additional compelling environmental reasons for adoption. What might be strategies and real options to conclude my presentation? I think we've touched on these items, and we've seen the mess that's coming with the IMO 2020 step change chaos. We see that structural changes are underway. There's a commodity play on fuel. Regional air quality for better human health must be kept in mind as we seek greenhouse gas reductions. Ships as risky long-lived assets face a more rapid pace of change on regulations. And to summarize, we have to take actions, not words. While awaiting decades for zero-emission solutions, we spoil the planet more with ever greater stocks of accumulated pollution. Choose LNG fuel to enable substantial progress in reducing overall greenhouse gas emissions and also regionally improve air quality for better human health. It's a stock problem, not a flow problem. Act now, adopt LNG fuel, safe, clean, proven, abundant, available, affordable. For more references, you can go to the CLNG website or the ThinkStep website for the documents I've cited. It is a commodity play, but one where the ship owner, whose crystal ball appears cloudy today, one thing is very clear, that LNG is a winning fuel going forward on investment returns and environmental benefits. Thank you.
Thanks, John. One of the things that we've talked about here the last 2 days has been the question of innovation and change, and I'm very pleased to note that the members of the panel here today are all people that are very much involved in that change and in that innovation. And let me just briefly identify and introduce them. First to speak will be Svein Steimler. Svein is the president and CEO of NYK Group Europe and has responsibility in certainly Europe, Africa, and other parts of the world in terms of other things that he does for NYK. He's been a corporate officer since 2013 and was the first non-Japanese to be CEO of NYK Europe. Importantly for many of you in this audience, he also represents Japan ship owners at the ISC. So he has a lot of influence over things that happen here. Next to Svein is Capt. Segar from the Assistant Chief Executive of Singapore Port Authority. Capt. Segar is accountable for the operational activities, and interestingly enough, he also looks after the flag state, port state, and coastal state activities for Singapore, which is a major undertaking, no doubt, with all the traffic that goes through Singapore. Following Capt. Segar will be I got too much paper. Will be Sasaki-san, who is the director and the senior managing officer for Japan Maritime United Corporation. He's a naval architect and has extensive experience here in Japan. And he'll be followed by Hashimoto-san from MOL, from Mitsui O.S.K. Lines, MOL. He is a representative director, executive vice president, and executive officer of Mitsui, and has been involved in the LNG business since 1994. So I'm sure he has many experiences that none of us have had, and we look forward to hearing from him. And then I'm told the last speaker needs no introduction. He told me that himself. We all know Tom Strang from Carnival, and we'll welcome him in the wrap-up position. I just want to take a minute or two to work off of a couple of things that John said. Our industry has been working for decades to do the air quality cleanup. It has been something that we have all been part of for many, 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 many years. And although we are now rightfully looking at the carbon issue and moving forward with the carbon issue, we cannot forget that we really have two missions in front of us as an industry. They are both major issues that we need to address, and we need to address them both extremely seriously. What we do know is that liquefied natural gas pretty much takes care of our air quality issues from the maritime side. And as John noted in the Think Step study that CLNG did, we move the ball forward for carbon. What comes after that, where that bridge is to get to zero, I don't think there's anyone in this room that can definitively state what that is. But we do know that there's going to be a bridge. We don't know where it's going to go. We don't know how long it's going to be, but it's going to be there. And I think we all need to recognize as well that dreaming, hoping, singing a song, as Sakura-san would like to do, is not a plan. It is not a plan of action. And if we all come away from this meeting and other meetings that we go to on these subjects with the idea that we have to do something, that waiting is not a solution, I think we're all going to be better for it. So with that, let me ask Mr. Steimler to start talking about his activities.
Thank you, Peter.
Always a pleasure.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Thank you for that introduction, Pete. We've all been witness to a couple of days with very interesting presentations. There's been lots of talk about the fact that the various stakeholders in the shipping industry have to communicate. And whilst I'm the first to agree that the 3 C's are important, the communication, communication, and communication is important. As Peter Keller just said, we need to act. And in my short presentation, which is nothing like many of the other presentations, both yesterday and today, here in front of you, you see the world's first PCTC with a capacity of close to 4,000 cars. It is LNG propulsed, and it's pushing ice on its way into St. Petersburg. I'm happy to be a member or employed by a company who has a number of joint ventures around the world in various countries. This joint venture with Wallenius Lines in Sweden has lasted since 1992, after NYK purchased UECC at the time in 1990. On this steering committee, I'm pleased to say that we have taken action for UECC. UECC is an operator who operates some 20 vessels in European waters. I'd like to just refer to Martin Stopford, who yesterday mentioned that European market is an ideal market for shipping. If you look at the coastline around most of the 28 EU countries. Tomorrow that might be slightly different. And it's been a game going on for too long. I usually call it a sandbox, but leave that for now. It's an ideal marketplace to get lots of trucks off the road. He's absolutely right. Why isn't this happening? There's lots of talk, there's lots of communication, The assets are there, but nothing much is happening. The PCTCs, which run in European waters today, are to a large degree transporting cars. To some degree, high and heavy vehicles or material as well, as you will see here. But it's clear to me that the marketplace is so much bigger. And the marketplace can and should be attacked more vigorously. But again, the various players have to play ball. I say again, I'm happy to be a member of a company who is, I'd like to say, foresightful. We're ahead of the game as far as investments are concerned. And it's a pleasure to be there. It's a pleasure to be amongst shareholders who can go and order 2 of these ships. And these were ships which were delivered some 3 years ago. They're not large ships like Captain Koyama was referring to, but they are 181 meters. They're 3,800 cars, to be simplistic about it, and they have a Finnish Ice Class 1A Super. They push ice up to 2 meters. But the interesting thing, when you see these ships pushing ice, you see nothing coming out of their funnels. The shipping industry is often accused of being rich and dirty. And why are they dirty? Simply because we have a tendency of letting off lots of dirt from our funnels from time to time. That is not the case on a ship like this. We have gone further, I'm happy to say. Only last week, or the week before, did we at board level declare a third option on the next generation PCTC for the European market. This is actually a hybrid vessel. It's the LNG propulsion again, and with a battery pack. And we've made sure the ship is designed to increase the battery pack, should that be necessary. And what this does is it's like a hybrid car. We've learned a lot from the car industry. We transport them, and we've learned a lot from the car industry, where we simply shave off the peaks at sea, thus reducing our consumption. And then we use the batteries for maneuvering in port as well. Now, there's lots of talk about battery technology. It's ongoing as we speak. We haven't gotten quite where we want to be just yet. It's easy to operate a battery ferry in the Norwegian fjords, although I will say there are some hazardous problems. We had the one we have, in Norway at the moment caught fire the other day. There are issues with batteries. There are issues with battery-driven cars who self-ignite. So we're not quite there yet. What we do know is, and hence the decision to go and contract these vessels is, as Peter Keller clearly said, and as John said quite appropriately, we have a technology with the LNG which works. These vessels are all going to be placed, or their home port is in Zeebrugge. In connection with ordering the 2 first vessels, we in NYK, we made another joint venture where we decided to contract a bunker vessel, a 5,000 cubic meter bunker vessel. Being at the forefront of the marketplace, looking ahead, you need to make sure that you have your infrastructure in order. So we contracted and built a 5,000 cubic meter bunker vessel as well, which again is located in Zeebrugge. If our moderator will allow me, I'd like to step back to the previous panel just for a minute, or the previous panel, when it comes to ports. I am the chairman of the world's largest car terminal. We last year passed through ICO 3.6 million cars. This autumn, we had Elon Musk visiting us, and I'm pleased to say we signed a contract for all imports of Teslas into Europe. Now, why would that be the case? The Belgian government has decided that port areas is the area where they want to erect windmills. So this one we jumped onto immediately. And I'm now chairing a company which is now planning to, it's actually the largest on-land windmill operation or construction operation in Belgium. We are erecting and will have in operation no less than 11 windmills jointly with the Port of Zeebrugge and Engie. The 11 windmills to grow even up to possibly 20 windmills within the next few years. And what will these initial 11 windmills do? They will, first of all, give us electricity in the terminal. They will push electricity into the grid to the local community. My overall goal, or our goal rather, is to electrify the whole terminal. We've already put solar panels on all our buildings. The overall goal is to make sure all our equipment in a few years is electrical. Elon Musk liked this plan. Our plan is to make sure that we have cold ironing for all vessels coming in. We can, when the terminal is fully constructed by the end of 2021, we can operate no less than 16 PCTCs simultaneously. And you can imagine 16 PCTCs operating alongside with their generators running. There is quite a bit of fumes or greenhouse gases coming off those ships. The overall goal is to make sure that these ships shut down completely. Added to this, the mother company of ICO, UECC, namely NYK, company I proudly work for, has already contracted one LNG PCTC for Trans-Pacific operation. There is no doubt in my mind that within short, we will also see LNG-propulsed vessels operating between Japan and Europe. So the idea being to cut emissions drastically on these specific vessels, in addition to what our company is doing otherwise in connection with trying to cut emissions. As mentioned, the LNG is a proven and competitive fuel on the rise. There aren't too many vessels operating at the moment, but this will grow. I am absolutely confident about it. The availability of fuel and fuel bunkering will also increase. There is no doubt about it. Look at the consumption reduction we have in tons on the conventional vessels compared to the first E-class vessels, which came out only 3 years ago. These are two-stroke high-pressure vessels. The next ones are four-stroke engines. We've cut the consumption on a daily base by close to 50%, which to me is significant. Is this enough? No. As Peter Keller said, the LNG is a bridge, but what people tend to forget is that once biofuels, biogases come into play, the infrastructure which is there for the based on LNG can be used for exactly the same. And it's taken decades to build this infrastructure. It's a very, very, very important point, which we sometimes tend to forget. This slide I actually like, because in terms of carbon emissions, have a look at this. Our next Tier 3 vessels will have up to 30% reduction in CO2 compared to today's ships. We will have 85% reduction in NOx and 99% in SOx. And particles will be reduced by 95%. To me, staggering amounts. We are doing things more than talking. What are we getting back as a result of this? Getting back to Martin's presentation yesterday, an excellent presentation. We go to a car manufacturer, and the car manufacturer will say, well, we'll love to do something with you. However, we can do 5 years, 10 years, but you have to reduce your rate by 20%. Now, to me, that doesn't make much sense. That means, yes, the talking is important because there is a cost element. There is a cost element in putting these LNG plants in the vessel. Like Captain Koyama said, when the double-doubles were introduced, it was automatically an uplift of $12 million per ship. Here we have an uplift of $15 million per ship for the time being. Somebody's got to pay it. The buck doesn't and cannot stop with us as operators. We have the same with the truckers. And we're under pressure, but again, where I like us to be able to be talking is that we make sure that people understand what the consequences are, what is at stake, and making sure that everybody play. Talking of banks, in June, I spoke to banks in Norway related to, okay, what can you give us? You know, here we are, we're going to build something environmentally friendly. Come on, you know, it's nothing to be gained. I'm hoping that ultimately, Paul, there are going to be some benefits to be gotten out of this as such. By the way, interestingly enough, the day we can get the ships financed the same way as we did the windmills, where we ended up with a negative interest, that'll be the day. It'll be interesting to operate ships. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to finish off with one slide, and I apologize for it has been used before and it's used quite often. I will nevertheless throw it up again, and it's Charles Darwin, and you can use this in metaphoric terms. It is not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent, but the one most responsive to change. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Svein. Captain?
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. First, I would like to congratulate Muraka-san for this excellent and successful forum. I think next I should thank the Wonder Woman, Sakura-san, and her team for the excellent arrangements, hospitality, for making this forum successful. It's my pleasure here to join you guys at the Yokohama Maritime Forum, and I will be presenting on LNG as a cleaner marine fuel towards 2020 and beyond. Let me run through quickly. I have to give you a little bit of background of Maritime and Port Authority of Singapore. We were formed in 1996 through the merger of three organizations. I don't want to labor more on that, but what it does, it brings together several functions as the registry of ships and regulation of shipping, certification and training of seafarers, as well as the industry promotion function together. Today, MPA is responsible for both regulating and promoting the maritime sector in Singapore. I'll just cover a little bit on MPA's vision to be a leading maritime agency driving Singapore's global maritime aspiration. We take on multiple roles to fulfill our three key mission objectives. This includes developing ourselves as a global hub port an international maritime center, and safeguarding and advancing Singapore's strategic maritime interests. This is a little bit on our economic growth. I think the slide speaks for itself. Our port is connected to 600 ports worldwide in over 120 countries, and more than 130,000 ships call at Singapore annually. We continue to report relatively good performance despite increasing competition. I think this morning, Chomeng said there's PSA International, that's 81 million, of which I think 36.6 million TEU goes to the port of Singapore. Shanghai did about 40 million TEUs. We also retain our position as world's top bunkering port. The Singapore registry continues to rank amongst the top 5 registries worldwide. In terms of shipping groups in Singapore, there's about 15 years ago, there were about 40 international shipping groups in Singapore. This number has grown to more than 150 today. This core group of ship owners and operators continue to draw a wide range of maritime service providers in Singapore. Today, the maritime industry contributes about 7% of our GDP and about 170,000 people. Maritime Singapore is and will remain a vital part of our economy. Okay. Just a little bit more. Singapore is the world's top bunkering port, so you know why LNG is very important to us. Annual bunker sales has grown from 16.9 million tons in 1996 to a record high of 48 million tons in 2016. Over the past 20 years, MPA has put in place the enabling infrastructure and regulation, as well as invested in new technologies as we constantly reinvent to stay relevant in the global bunkering industry. Quality and quantity assurance remains our top priority for the shipping community to have confidence to take bunkers in Singapore.
I'm not going to use it.
The growing environmental regulation calls for a need to adopt cleaner alternative fuels. With increasing environmental regulation, there's a greater need to explore and adopt cleaner alternative fuels. Singapore would need to be plugged in to the entire development and make sure that we are ready for our customers. Today, we are preparing ourselves to be an LNG bunkering ready port as ships will be calling at the port of Singapore next year. Beyond IMO 2020, there's a greater emphasis on decarbonization. The IMO data collection system for fuel consumption started early this year, with sulfur limits coming into force come January 2020, EDI Phase 2 for applicable ships also commencing. Then we have the EEDI Phase 3 being brought forward for certain ship types from 2025 to 2022. In the spring 2023 at MEPC 80, we should have the revised IMO GHG strategy. It really remains to be seen what form of regulation on GHG emission will be. 2025 marks the beginning of EEDI phase for the remaining ship types. And of course, we have by now the well-known 2030 and 2050 targets for reduction of GHG emission from ships. One very important item to note is that various studies, projections have come to the conclusion that in order to achieve the 2050 target, which is 50% absolute reduction as compared to 2008 levels, is the zero-emission vessels must enter the global fleet by 2030. LNG, as we all know, is technically proven marine fuel solutions which has been adopted for close to 20 years. In a recent study commissioned by CLNG and SGMF, amongst the key alternate fuels such as hydrogen, ammonia, methanol, LPG, biofuel, etc. LNG is the most matured, scalable, and commercially viable alternative fuels available for the maritime industry. We know that LNG provides significant advantage in terms of improving air quality when compared to other conventional fuels, which is particularly important in ports and coastal areas. It also eliminates SOx pollutions, reduces NOx emission by 95%, and drops PM emission by nearly 99%. In fact, as technology advances, bio and synthetic source of LNG may cut GHG emission even further. The Singapore government has made significant investments into LNG to ensure that our energy security. The Singapore LNG terminal, we call it the SLNG, currently has 3 storage tanks with a total capacity of 540,000 meter cube and 1 LNG storage tank of 260,000 meter cube capacity. The 5th storage tank will be ready by 2023. Singapore is able to cater to LNG bunkering needs and other small-scale activities going forward. Singapore aims to be the global LNG hub where physical deliveries, pricing, financial intermediation, and decision-making takes place in Singapore. And as MPA, we are committed by supporting Singapore LNG hub vision from the port and shipping angle, develop Singapore as an LNG bunkering hub, and also support environmentally sustainability in our port. We have the SLNG's truck loading facility, which is jointly funded by MPA and SLNG, and this is already in place since April 2017. This was an important first step towards developing LNG trucking business in Singapore, which also helps to facilitate truck-to-ship LNG bunkering. SLNG currently operates 2 jetty, and its secondary jetty has completed its modification this year to receive and reload small LNG ships of between 2,000 and 10,000 cubic meters in capacity. This jetty can help to support the development of small-scale LNG activities such as LNG bunkering and regional distributions. Singapore has taken steps towards cleaner marine fuels. MPA has started to equip our port with capabilities to supply LNG as a fuel. At the same time, we're also keeping abreast of developments in other alternate fuels such as biofuels, methanol, and LPG. The LNG bunkering pilot program was launched in 2017 for a period of 3 years to test operational protocols, gain operational experience, and continue to beef up Singapore's capabilities in the areas of LNG bunkering to ensure LNG bunkering is carried out safely, efficiently, and reliably. While it may take time for LNG to take off as a marine fuel globally, we have taken steps to kickstart LNG bunkering in Singapore through our LNG bunkering pilot program. This is to ensure that the Port of Singapore is fully ready to serve the community of LNG fueled vessel when demand for LNG as bunker picks up, particularly with the announcement by the International Maritime Organization, IMO, to implement the 0.5% global sulfur cap from coming January 2020 onwards. The main items of our pilot program is to the issuance of bunker supplier license, co-funding to build interim truck loading facility, co-funding of LNG fuel vessels, introduction of port use incentive for LNG fueled harbor crafts and ocean-going vessels, development of a technical reference for LNG bunkering, international collaboration with LNG bunkering, expanded the port focus group, I think this morning we saw that, and commissioning of safety distance studies. I would like to share that Singapore has been undertaking LNG bunkering activities for a while already, and we are building up ourselves to be well-known position to facilitate the potential demand growth. I think from the picture you can see that we have performed more than 150 operations for truck-to-ship LNG bunkering and have gathered a good amount of experience. Here's a little snapshot of the progress of LNG bunkering. In 2017, one of our bunker licensee, Pavilion LNG, conducted the first truck-to-ship LNG bunkering demonstration. Fuel LNG, who is another supplier of ours, also performed the bunkering of LNG bunker vessels in accordance with the Technical Reference 56, which I will elaborate a little bit further later. Since 2018, LNG-fueled hovercraft have started coming on stream, and this has helped us to build up our capabilities and experience in LNG bunkering operations. Lastly, earlier this year, the first ship-to-ship LNG bunkering operation for gas trials purpose was performed in Singapore. Moving on to the next phase, we are very much looking forward to the delivering of 2 LNG bunker vessels by our 2 licensees, which are Pavilion Energy and Fuel LNG. This slide will cover you a little bit on what we have been doing on the progress of technical reference. I don't want to go into detail, but I think this morning we saw some of the I think IAPH put up all these safety standards and all that. I think what I want to emphasize is that all this is possible because SGMF was part of this technical reference. They were doing a lot of studies and operational safety measures, and I think they shared globally with everybody, including IAPH, and Singapore is one of those who adopted this and then revised it a little bit to our environment. On the international front, a grouping of ports was formed, of which Singapore was one of the founding members, to see the development of a network of LNG bunker-ready ports, catering to the needs of the global shipping community, especially running across from the east-west and trans-Pacific routes. Last but not least, Singapore is working with both local and international partners on this LNG journey. Through collaborative efforts, we tackle the industry concerns and needs to ensure that LNG is ready to be provided as a fuel when the shipping industry requires it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Captain. Sasaki-san?
Hi.
Thank you, Captain. No, we're good.
Thank you, Keller-san.
Yep.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Sasaki from Japan Marine United. Do you know Japan Marine United? Maybe someone don't know. So first, I'd like to give a brief introduction of my company. JMU was established in 2013, only about 7 years from the birth, by the merger of Universal Shipbuilding and IHI Marine United. But our history is originated in 19th century. Shipbuilding division of JFE, Hitachi Zosen, IHI, and Naval Ship Division of Sumitomo Heavy Industries finally merged in JMU. similar slide is shown by the former speakers. This slide shows IMO's reduction target of GHG emissions. In the absence of improvements or countermeasures, CO2 emissions from international shipping will increase significantly according to the growth of global maritime trade. IMO already set the Energy Efficiency Design Index, EEDI, required for new ships through 3 phases: 10%, 20%, 30% reduction respectively. Currently, in the phase 1, phase 2 will be effective in next year, and will be phase 3 in 2025. IMO also set out a new target of reducing average carbon intensity by 40% in 2030 and reducing total CO2 emissions by 50% in 2050 compared to 2008. The point is that the new 2030 target requires the reduction of average CO2 emissions, including existing ships, not only new ships. Therefore, existing ships also need to significantly reduce CO2 emissions, and maybe slow-speed operation will be the main countermeasures. To minimize the impact on existing ships, it is important to build new ships with low CO2 emissions in advance, and promoting LNG-fueled ships is the most effective means. The basic role of shipyards is to provide new ships having required performance. This slide shows a time chart of new ship development against IMO's GHG reduction roadmap. It is possible for high-level shipyards to achieve EEDI phase 3 with conventional oil fuel by seeking the best hull home, high propulsion efficiency, and adopting the best energy-saving devices. However, the 2030 target of carbon intensity reduction of 40% is a high hurdle. As I mentioned before, the 40% reduction includes existing ships, so new ships are expected to achieve higher reductions. Considering this, it is necessary to adopt LNG fuel, and shipyards will pursue the best matching of dual-fuel engines, fuel gas supply system, and LNG tank system. Further, new technologies need to be introduced for using carbon-free fuel, carbon-neutral fuel, or renewable energy to achieve 50% reduction of total annual GHG emissions by 2050 and move toward future zero emissions. LNG fuel tank is the key component for LNG fueled ships. There are 3 types of tank, and this table compares the characteristics of these 3 types. Type C is a cylindrical independent tank and has a lot of experience in small-size LNG carriers. And next, SPB. SPB means self-supporting prismatic shape IMO type B, and it is also independent tank. SPB tank was developed by IHI, and JMU is now SPB licensor. And last one, membrane. Membrane tank is integrated in ship hull structure and has a lot of track record in large-size LNG carriers. In case that the tank can be installed on exposed deck, Type C will be suitable. For ships, however, having not enough space on exposed deck and need to situate the tank inside hull structures, SPB or membrane will be a better solution. In the case of LNG-fueled ships, the plant components are dual-fuel engine, fuel gas supply system, and LNG tank system. And it is necessary to pursue optimal matching considering the arrangement. JMU already has concept designs for a bulk carrier and a container ship, both having AIP from classification societies. For bulk carriers, Type C tank is applied and placed on the aft upper deck, here. On the other hand, for container ships, SPB tank is applied and placed just in front of the engine room. Alternatively, the tank can be placed under the superstructure. As you know, the global limit of sulfur content in ship's fuel will be 0.5% next year. For this reason, the development of LNG fuel ships and related LNG bunkering infrastructure has received much attention from maritime industry and government officials. The Japanese government is no exception. In addition, the Ministry of Land Infrastructure, Transport and Tourism has set a target of reducing 1.75 million tons of CO2 emissions from coastal ships by 2030. And the spread of LNG fueled ships is one of the solutions to achieve this target. Now, Tokyo Bay is planned as one of the LNG fuel supply locations. And here, Yokohama port will be the mother port for LNG bunkering ships. JMU has received an order of the bunkering ship from EcoBunker Shipping. The ship has 2,500 cubic meter LNG bunker tank and 1,500 cubic meter fuel tank. Fuel oil tank is arranged here, and SPB LNG bunker tank is arranged here. Ecobunker Shipping is a joint venture between Sumitomo Corporation, Ueno Transtech, and Yokohama Kawasaki International Port Corporation, YKIP. Needless to say, YKIP is the organizer of this forum. Sumitomo Corporation is a well-known trading company. Ueno is a shipping company and operates about 15% of Japanese coastal tankers. The ship is now under construction and will be delivered in March 2021. Thank you very much.
Shimura-san? Thank you, Sasaki-san.
Thank you very much, Peter, for your kind introduction. And ladies and gentlemen, and particularly for the Moroka-san, thank you very much for giving us a very unique opportunity to speak about the LNG as a marine fuel. So that the Mitsui O.S.K. lines is one of the very big full-scale shipping company in Japan, and especially that myself, I worked for LNG shipping sector in past 25 years, so that I am very strong supporter of the LNG bunkering part. So that as many speakers already mentioned, that to me it's very obvious that the LNG bunker, LNG as a marine fuel will have a quite big and positive potential for the industry. It's obviously that the quite environmentally friendly, clean, and the less GHG emission. It's the very big benefit for the industry and the world. And also that economically, commercially, it will be the very, very competitive fuel for coming years. We recognize that in LNG industry that the price model of LNG is dramatically changing nowadays, and the so-called decoupling of the price mechanism against oil is going on. So at least for coming 10 to 15 years' time, I strongly believe that the LNG as an energy source will be the very competitive energy source compared to, especially compared to that low sulfur oil, which will be that $250 more expensive than the crude oil. So that it seems to me that it will quite make sense for us to think about the LNG. However, still there are lots of the challenge we need to overcome. The capex part is quite big problem. That capex of the both sides, LNG provider, including that LNG bunkering vessels, then also that the ocean-going side, that our target is a container car carrier and bulk carriers, and these vessels to install that LNG fuel engine that we need to justify that huge amount of the capital expenses. Therefore, how to overcome these challenges will be that our target to achieve. Today, I will focus on that LNG bunkering side especially. sorry. MOL, we are operating about 840 vessels all over the world as of today. And among over 800, we have 100 LNG carriers, which already, except some exceptional vessels using LNG as a fuel. Therefore, that we accumulated lots of the experiences that how to operate the ocean-going vessels with LNG fuel. There are quite many sectors related to the LNG, but today I want to highlight this LNG bunkering part. Last year, followed by NYK, that we also started the operation of the tugboat using that LNG fuel. And this is the kind of the pilot project for us to accumulate our know-how of the Japanese domestic in Japanese domestic water, that how to use the LNG as a fuel. So then we are in the process to construct the relatively large scale of LNG bunkering barges. That number one vessel for us is that we just started the construction last year, that 18,000 cubic meters. As a bunkering vessel, relatively big size, and with a membrane system. And we expect that this vessel will be completed by the end of next year and start the operation to the end of next year or early 2021. A second vessel that we fixed with the pavilion in Singapore is that slightly smaller, but still relatively large size in the industry, 12,000 cubic meters, to provide a service for pavilion. Our first vessel will be mainly used at the Rotterdam port, and second one will be used in Singapore port. That both are quite important hub for that the global shipping industry. So our target as of today is that container shipping. As of today, we recognize that quite many vessels under constructions, not only MOL, but the many vessels are under construction, and the various different sizes, 2,500, 5,000, 7,500, etc. So you can recognize that still we are very long way to go to establish the industrial standards. So that it's a very early stage. So that we will see that what kind of the standard will be established within for coming 3 to 5 years time. But my own opinion is that if we will be really serious to encourage that ship owners to use the LNG as a marine fuel as a real alternative to the oil, that we need to reduce the cost dramatically, and to do so, that we probably need to construct that relatively large scale of the facility. Otherwise, as a pilot plant, it's okay, but to become the mainstream of we need a scale. Then it's a very rough calculation, but for coming 20 years time, that we expect that the total volume of the LNG bunker requirement will reach 35 million tons per annum. That somebody told us that, especially that oil majors, that their expectation is that much bigger, that 40 to 50 million tons per annum. We will see. But to support that this volume, at least that we require 100 LNG bunkering vessels, which will require that roughly $5 billion new investment. And this is only for the LNG bunkering barge. If you include the shore facilities, like the tanks and pipes and the truck-to-ship facilities, etc., then probably that the total investment amount will be doubled. So we need to prepare for that, how to achieve. As of today, there are several government support programs, Japan, Korea, Singapore, EU, etc. But it seems to me that still relatively lukewarm one. And considering about that $10 billion new investment, it's still we need some very robust scheme to accelerate the process. Otherwise, it's very difficult for us. To be very honest, that as a shipping company, that we MOL do not expect that the LNG bunkering business as a so-called profit center. From our point of view, it's a kind of a cost center. So that we really need to establish a very good facility and integrated facility to enable our fleet to have a kind of the kickstart to convert our fuel from oil to gas. But to do so, that we need to think about how to solve this $10 billion problem. So, as a conclusion of my short speech, that for promotion of LNG fuel, support from the government is quite essential. And in addition to that, I think that the cooperation and collaboration of all sectors, the public sectors and private sectors all over the world, will be very, very essential. That this is quite a new industry, and we really need to nurture this sector. And the LNG bunkering will be materialized. But within 5 years or 10 years or 20 years, it's quite up to us and our efforts and our achievement. But to do so, that the independent company like us has a limitation of the resources, financial resources and human resources. So everything cannot be done by ourselves. Therefore, that we definitely need to work together to materialize that very good circumstances to accelerate the LNG bunkering sector. But overall, as I mentioned previously, that it will be quite a good investment because the whole shipping industry will be the beneficiary if we can successfully start up this sector. So this is my main point I want to emphasize today. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Hashimoto-san.
Yep.
Thank you very much. Mr. Strang.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, good afternoon, everybody. I think we're all beginning to feel the strain of some very extensive debate. I'm here to hopefully brighten things up and remind you that we're all here to enjoy ourselves and have a great time. After all, this is the cruise industry. Oh, sorry, no, we're talking about fuel. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for inviting me here today. Muraoka-san, congratulations, 160 years. I think it's a phenomenal achievement. I saw a cruise ship coming in today to the terminal just down there, so that's fantastic. So Carnival and LNG. I spoke a little bit about this yesterday, so I'm not going to go through everything, and I think we really want to get on to the questions. So who are we? We're 9 cruise ship brands. I'm actually not sure if it's 104 ships or 105 ships, as we had a ship delivered last week, and actually it's now 20 ships on order, plus a number of options. This just gives you some of the statistics here, and I think I mentioned it yesterday. We lift about 3.5 million tons of fuel a year in over 172 different ports. We visit 720 ports, and we don't bunker in all the conventional locations, and we didn't choose our ships because we knew we could bunker. We chose our ships, and we then chose a partner that would follow us. And it's been a phenomenal experience. It's been challenging at times. It's not easy, but it's doable. And as one of my bosses always tells me, leaders lead. And so I think I fully agree with Svein and the others. You have to make a decision. You make that decision, and then you move. If you stand still, you get shot. So these are the ships we have on order at the moment. The XL class, we've got 8 more of these coming. That's the next one, which should be the Costa Smeralda, a little bit delayed, I'm afraid. The Sphere class, 2 for Princess, building in Fincantieri. The first ship is using 3 Type C tanks, operating at 0.7 bar. We could operate at 4.5 bar. The Sphere will have 4,000 cubic meters on board in 2 duplex tanks. And then the rest of those ships, we don't talk about scrubbers, we talk about advanced air quality systems. These are the remaining parts of our fleet that are under order at the moment, the longer term deliveries. For us to convert those ships to LNG would have been very expensive. And the last one, which is the new class for Seabourn, will only operate on MGO. Unlike some of our competition, I think we still think that operating some of these expedition cruise ships are going to be very challenging on LNG. We'd love to be able to do it, but the supply chain is just not developed enough in those remote regions. But it will come. I'm convinced of that. Why are we doing this? Why did we choose LNG? I can assure you we didn't choose LNG because of the carbon reduction. That wasn't the reason we chose it. We chose it for everything you've heard before. We chose it because it's the best fuel for local emissions. It was also because as an industry that operates very much in the public face, you know, we have a term in our industry, which I don't think any of the rest of you have, which is called horizon pollution. It comes from our good friends in the northern part of Europe, and they don't like our ships because sometimes you can't see much more than our ships in their ports. We've been challenged, though, to do what we can, and we found that LNG gave us by far the best reduction in local emissions. We're driven by our sustainability goals. These are all linked to the United Nations, to the various different sustainability goals within the that others are using, but we have carbon footprint is one of them. We set ourselves a target of reducing our carbon footprint by 25%, and I'm proud to say that we easily achieved that. We've overachieved that. Every new ship that we deliver, new design of ship, is at least 20% more efficient than the last class that we had. We're investing around about $75 million a year in R&D. And it's not pure R&D, it's actually demonstration. It's, you know, we've seen a massive reduction. We've reduced our fuel consumption by 30%. And you cannot just think that you're going to buy your way out of the issues regarding greenhouse gases by just finding a drop in fuel that's going to be the solution forever. You've got to continue to develop and innovate. And innovation is one of the most important things that we can do in this sector. We firmly believe in cold ironing. We think that's a phenomenal way to reduce maybe 10 to 15% of your emissions profile. After all, we are a sector that spends 5 out of 7 days in port on average. So getting connected, particularly, we heard it earlier today, we heard it yesterday, in those areas where you've got renewable energy or you've got clean, carbon-free electricity, it makes sense. So if you link those things together, you've got a clear way forward. As we look to, this is the virtuous cycle as well, because as we're a business, the biggest single cost that we have is fuel. If you can reduce your fuel consumption, you reduce your emissions. How do you do that? If you look at these things, yes, we've got AAQS. I just realized I've put the wrong term in that slide. I'm in trouble. But we do many, many different things. But one of the things you'll notice in the environmental area is a lot of the things that you add to ships to reduce your emissions actually take more energy. So all the time that we're being regulated to reduce this, to reduce that, to improve this, to improve that, we're actually being asked to use more energy on board these vessels. Now, yes, we work very closely with the technology providers, whether it's within ballast water treatment, advanced wastewater treatment systems, the AAQSs, the new LNG plants, etc. A lot of these, though, require more energy. So you've got to be continuously thinking about what you do. 4 of our ships are using air lubrication systems. That's where we put a raft of bubbles under the hull, and that helps us reduce our fuel consumption by at least 5%. So you've got to continuously innovate. This is our global emissions approach. I think I'm not going to spend a lot of time going through this, but we started off looking at what we were going to do for 2020. We then realized that actually you've got to look at where we're going to be by 2050 and by the end of the century. LNG, we're absolutely committed to it. I don't think any of you need to know that that's where we stand. We've heard it from everybody else. We firmly believe in it. It's the primary fuel for our next generation of large ships. We're the first in the industry to do it. We're very proud to do it. Although sometimes I do believe the bleeding edge, as Pete knows really well, and I think Svein knows, can be a lonely place to be. As I said, 40% of our fleet is fitted for cold arning, and that's increasing. So most of our European ports, where we actually only have 2 places to plug in, we're going to have them fitted for cold arning very soon. And we've seen the rest of the industry following us. 44% of the cruise ships on order today are going to be LNG fueled. And I think when you spoke to most of the observers around LNG 5 years ago, they would have never said the cruise industry would be the first sector to move in this direction. So anyway, and of course, as many of you have heard, we've recently announced we're going to start putting a battery pack on the Ida Perla. Now, she's a ship that actually has 1 LNG engine on board. She used to have a truck following her around Europe, filling up with LNG in port, or using LNG in port because she had no tank on board. So we've got a battery. We're putting in 10 megawatts of batteries for maneuvering, so it's fine. We'll be able to compare notes in a few years to see how it's gone. And then we've also announced the fuel cell program that we have. And Aida Nova, in a couple of years' time, will have a fuel cell on board. It's not going to be an LNG fuel cell. It's going to be a methanol fuel cell, and but it's got a hydrogen. It's got a reformer, and it'll use hydrogen for the fuel after we've converted the methanol. But that's what we have to do. We have to innovate. We have to look at those things. Whether that's the long-term future for our industry, who knows? What we do know, and I think everyone said this before, and we heard it yesterday, is that if we're not delivering near zero or zero emission ships in 2030, then we're never going to meet the targets that have been set. And that, we're working with our suppliers. We're talking to, and we have a supply deal with Shell. They've been working very closely with them to see how can we begin to introduce 5, 10, 15, 20% of sustainable synthetic or biomethane, liquefied methane into that supply chain. Because as we've seen before, the moment you can begin to do that, you're going to drive those emissions down further and further. So look, you've seen these before from other people. So that is actually bunkering. That's 1,100 tons of LNG going over every 2 weeks in Barcelona. I'm really pleased with this picture because you just show the size and scale of the cruise industry there. It's a beautiful location. You've got 0 sulfur emissions, very much a massive reduction in nitrogen oxides, and nearly 100% on particulate. And we see on this well-to-wake analysis that we can probably achieve 15% on carbon emissions. We used medium-speed, dual-fuel, 4-stroke engines operating on the Otto cycle. Not the best for carbon reduction. We have a methane slip issue, but we're working with our engine manufacturers to reduce that, whether it's going to be through catalysts, whether it's going to be through high pressure injection into the medium speed engine. I don't know what the answer is, but we're working on it, and we will have solutions. I think I said it yesterday, as engineers and naval architects, that's what we love, a challenge. That's the best thing. Whether it's then financially viable, that's another matter. But here, what we can see is today, we've heard it from John, we've heard it from other speakers, the financial situation for fuel, for LNG as fuel, is looking better and better. And by the way, you had a couple of new ships missing from your slides. Hashimoto-san, you've got the ATB, the QLNG ATB in the USA, and the new one for Pete. I can't remember what the name of the company is for Disney. Yes, the other ATB.
It's a Freudian slip. And he didn't have the clean Jacksonville there either.
Well, yes, he did have the clean Jacksonville in there.
Oh, did he?
So one of the things I think people, if I was to look at what we're achieving on our AAQS, which is very good today because we're up over 85% operation, this is phenomenal. That 1.3% of the fuel mix is effectively the pilot fuel. The rest of it, since day one, we've been operating on LNG. We've actually had, apart from a couple of times when for guarantee claims we've had to do some modifications to the piping system, we're actually having to think about stopping the LNG so we can actually move the MGO through the system. But the reliability has been phenomenal, and the fuel consumption is great. You're up in the high 90s. It's a phenomenal piece of work. Where are we operating? And I do apologize, I seem to have dropped off a part of the world that we're actually currently in. But this is where we're bunkering today and where we're going to be bunkering. The blue dots are where we've already carried out bunkering. And whilst Tenerife might be a good place for MGO or HFO, it certainly isn't the easiest place to get LNG. If anybody wants to put a bunker vessel into Tenerife, please let my friends at Shell know, or anybody else. We really need to think about that. But the Arabian Gulf will be going there very soon. We already know South Florida. That's a massive business model for us, and we're working with our partner Shell there to develop the supply chain. Yes, you will see. I hope I got New York in the right place. We have plans. I like to put this up because it kind of gives you a feel of what we see, and it hasn't been updated because we've had another 3 officers fully certified, and I saw on Slido there's some comments about this. Over the, what was it, 316 million tons of LNG traded globally in 2018. So far, we've done over 16,000 tons of LNG. So the scale is nowhere near there. But it's improving all the time. We've got 10 ships on order. 40% of all the cruise ships on order for delivery by 2026 will use LNG. One of our ships uses around 30,000 tons of LNG a year. And by the way, the only reason I use tons is because that's something that our executive leadership understands. If you start talking about MMBTU, cubic meters, yes, it gets quite confusing at times. And the average methane number has been 81. A methane number, for those of you, that is not the percentage of methane, that is the AVL content of methane. It is something that is of concern to the industry, but I have to say what we've seen has been phenomenal. So this is just from SGMF, the emission fact sheet. I'm not going to go through this. You've seen the study. You've heard about it from everybody else. Any questions? Thank you very much. And that is the Mardi Gras, and as she's going to look when she arrives in New York very soon, next year. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom. We have that much time? Oh, okay. I didn't realize we had that much time. We have 20 minutes. Good. Let me just make one comment. Tom mentioned bleeding edge, and I think some of us will admit to have been at the bleeding edge. The company I used to work for, Tote, we had the MAN MEGI engine number 1 and number 2. So we were essentially the beta test. And, but I can tell you that those ships have now been operating for 4 years on LNG. And just as Tom mentioned with his cruise ships, they operate flawlessly, and they go back and forth to Puerto Rico every week and operate on LNG. And our competitor in that trade route, Crowley, has also moved to LNG ships, and I think has the same experience. So I say that in case there's any ship owners in the room that are worried about bleeding edge. I think we've all bled, we've scarred up, and now I think the products and the development that we're seeing, the ships that we're seeing coming out, are operating extremely well. I can tell you that the bunker process, we did it in Jacksonville for 4 years, first truck, and then the Clean Jacksonville barge. That is also all operating flawlessly, and that barge is actually a membrane barge, so there is no pressure vessel on board that barge. Having said all that, let me just move to a couple of questions. I think the one issue that many of us talk about all the time as it regards LNG is, why has there not been a greater uptake in terms of new ship orders, especially in certain segments? And I think maybe the question is, what do we need to do as an industry, as a group, at least those of us that believe that LNG is the viable way forward? And how do we do that? How do we get more uptake? And perhaps maybe Captain, we start with you, and then I'll go down the list and come back to John and Svein.
I think there are three key things, I think, why we are not having this uptake of LNG. I think first is the demand uncertainty. It is a big challenge at this current moment. Then the other one, I think we all knew, the cost of building an LNG fuel vessel that is significantly higher than that of a conventional vessel. Then I think we have this global LNG bunkering supply chain. It is still very developing if you compare to Europe, and especially in the Asian side. I think Asian side we have a little bit of problem in that. I think and it is not only about engaging the ship owners and operators, but I think we need to go around and get various stakeholders in this global supply chain up. If we could get that in, I think we should be able to achieve. And this going around chicken and egg thing, which I hate that word, because that's the easiest phrase, easiest thing. Anything is chicken and egg. I hate that. But I think that's what we should do. But having said that, I think in Singapore, we are trying our best, engaging the shipping community to bring them all on board on this journey. You note from my presentation that we have made significant investment, especially on LNG infrastructure in Singapore itself. We as a government, we're trying to come in and see how much we could do. But you need to get the various stakeholders on board.
Thank you. Sagar-san?
Hi. Well, let me speak in Japanese.
Please.
Maybe someone needs translation device. キャプテンのご意見がほぼカバーしていると思います。やはり選手にとって LNG 燃料船を作るということは、まずは一つはコストですね。それと LNG 燃料がしっかりと供給されるのか、インフラストラクチャーの問題、この2つがやっぱり大きな問題だと思います。はい。
Thank you. Hashimoto-san?
Yeah, that the LNG supply side, as the people are saying, it's kind of the chicken and egg game, but the supply chain is gradually that starting up. So I'm relatively optimistic about the LNG supply side. The real issue is that likewise what happened in the renewable energy. As of today, the capital cost is quite expensive, but probably at the later, the cost will decrease gradually, and therefore, from the ship owner's point of view, it will no point to be a front runner, so that the cost will be that as of today that the initial cost is quite high, to be honest. But if afterwards the cost will be much more competitive and realistic level, so that in my opinion, that at the early stage we need the kind of the subsidy or tax scheme or something to start up, then to assist or encourage the ship owners' mindset. But the later stage, it will be that quite.
I'll ask John to address the issue of the fuel cost in terms of his investment study. But before I do that, let me go to Tom.
I think so. We're a slightly unique sector. Often we're accused of not being part of shipping, whereas I would adamantly say we are. And clearly, the cost uplift for a cruise ship that's costing $1 billion is not as high. But if you're then going to think about the through-life cost of the vessel, and you're starting to look at the cost of adding in the AQS, the cost of then replacing those probably halfway through the life cycle of that vessel, and then you look at the cost differential of the fuel, and we're all seeing the projections that we see there today, I think you really, the dynamic has changed. We expect to see LNG being far more competitively priced, because if your alternative is MGO, where are you going to be in the future? So I think that, yes, as I call it the bleeding edge, sometimes people will say it's much better to be second rather than first. But it's those of us who started out, I absolutely agree with you that we're seeing more and more infrastructure coming online. If you look around the locations, you look in Northern Europe, there's plenty of infrastructure there. The bunker vessels are coming more and more. That's not the challenge to me. The challenge is really persuading those ship owners who are notoriously conservative to really jump now. And that's, and I think the time is there. We've seen the investment cases that we've put through CLNG. They're looking really good. And yeah, why not? It's fine. Yeah? John?
This almost just had me ready to jump out of my seat, because it's the perfect question for me. In June of 2013, 6 years ago, Richard Dumoulin, who is currently the president of Intrepid Shipping and had been for several years the chairman of Intertanko, has an organization called Seamen's Church, which is a charity for seamen. And at the June 2013 conference, he said, John, can you explain the attributes and fundamentals of where the uptake of LNG fuel ships will be and maybe where it won't, and what those things mean, because it's played out in the market. So without my slides, let me turn my back to you, and I'm going to give you a very simple thing. There's two types of ships in the world. Those that are volume limited, naval architects learn this, cruise ships, container ships, ferries, etc., and those that are weight limited. They hit their Plimsoll mark with full weight on board and volume still left. The two types of ships in the world, volume limited, weight limited. Two kinds of voyages in the world. Global voyages, regional voyages. Now think about that for a moment. If I'm on a regional voyage with a weight limited ship, my tank does not take away from my cargo volume. I'm running at slower speeds carrying resources of relatively low value. I'm on a region so I can go point to point and back and forth. Fast adoption. Early adoption would be regional, volume limited vessels. Some of them might be close to the passenger, such as cruise or ferries, where we see point-to-point specific areas. Fast, early. You come down to the global trades, weight-limited tramp ships. They're going all over the world. Not point to point, not defined. They need full infrastructure. Slow adoption. Next would be volume-limited ships and global trades. Speed, container ships, price of fuel, the environmental picture. Early, fast, slow, last. And what has happened? What has happened to that group? In November 2017, CMA CGM broke the mold and jumped from regional to global with their 22,000 TEU gigantic container ships committed to LNG fuel. And since then, they've added several more. 5 more recently ordered at 15,500 cubic meter TEUs with gas plus scrubbers, same. But then they just added 10 more from Eastern, an asset supplier. So they have now over 20-some vessels of significance. And you're going to see more and more of that sector go forward. It's gone to the global side. Volume limited, weight limited. Global trades, regional trades. Early, fast, slow, last. And last is step forward. I have PowerPoints on that if someone would like to see it that Richard DeMolin had me do in 2013.
Same.
Well, it's just been covered, but I think we need to acknowledge that we are working in an ultra-conservative industry. You can see it when it comes to IT. We're late, we're way behind other industries. I usually say we're Stone Age, we're catching up. I think it's exactly the same when it comes to changing the fuels. We've seen it historically. Sail to steam, steam to diesel. Now something new. Something is about to come. Why? Not because the ship owner or the ship operator is pushing it. There are other forces outside of our control who are pushing us into a new mode of thinking. And people will cling in to the old ways as long as they can until regulatory bodies, in this case, will come and hit them on the head and say, look, you've got to move. So I think it was mentioned conservative. We have to acknowledge the fact that we are in a very, very, very old-fashioned industry and a conservative industry. And that, to me, is one of the main reasons for people not being at the front edge. That's why, again, it's nice to be in a company who's thinking forward and is being there. And I didn't say earlier that in the terms of UECC, by end of 2022, more than 50% of the owned fleet will be LNG propulsed. More than 70% of the total capacity, carrying capacity, will be LNG driven. To me, that is at being the forefront, and I think more people will come.
One of the other things that I would mention is that one of the things that we found is that because when you're using LNG, you no longer have that major fluctuations in the price of your fuel, because so much of the cost is fixed. It's the liquefaction cost. That's a factory cost. Once the factory's built, it's there. So your fluctuation, at least in North America, is primarily the Henry Hub or some such factor. What that means is that as a ship owner, as an operator, as a liner operator, which I was, I could tell my customer what his cost was for fuel as a fuel surcharge or whatever we were doing for however long I wanted to tell him, 5, 10 years, and my risk in doing that was minimal. Now, if we think about that as business leaders, and you can project out for an extended period of time a huge percentage of your daily operating costs, that's a huge business leg up, and it's one that I don't think we talk about enough as proponents of LNG, but it certainly is an important issue. One of the things I wanted to do before we jump off of here, Hashimoto-san, you were talking about a bunker vessel fleet of about 100, and that's probably as good a number as I've heard. But one of the questions I have, because I've been involved in building barges, and certainly in North America, Tom's provider is building barges. Disney's provider will be building a barge. What do you see as the difference? Do you see vessels continuing to be an important part of this, or do you see an industry that's going to go as bunkering is primarily out of barges? Do you see changes from there?
Yeah, that's still the very early stage. Actually, that what we are constructing as of today is almost identical to the normal LNG carrier, but with a smaller tank. But the concerning about the unique nature of the LNG bunkering business, perhaps that after accumulating the various experiences, we have some plenty of room to do that more innovation. And for example, that the vessel do not have to prepare for the ocean-going trade, so that the many cases that the LNG bunkering vessels will stay in the same area, and actually that even if that the sea will do the so-called milk run type service, that the actual going the distance is much smaller. And so that therefore the vessel's specification and maintenance, operation manuals, etc., might be either fundamentally different from the ocean-going the LNG carrier. Still, we are on the process of the learning curve. So therefore, if we will be successful enough, I hope that, for example, we can reduce the number of the seafarers dramatically. Then it will quite helpful that to achieve the competitive cost.
Sasaki-san, do you have any view on that from the builder's point of view?
バンカリング船自体は、橋本さんもおっしゃったように、小型の LNG 船、設計としてはあまり難しいところはないですね。ですからあとは本当にどうやって普及していくか、そこだけにかかっていると思います。造船所としてはバンカリング船であれ LNG 燃料船であれ、今の技術で全部対応できると思っています。
Thank you. We're running out of time, and one of the things I wanted to leave just a minute or two for at the end, as has been said repeatedly through these last 2 days, there is somewhat of a, I won't use the term mafia, but it's almost, of NYK people and those of us that have had the pleasure of working for Muraoka-san over the years, and one of those individuals who's much more eloquent than I am and wants to talk a little bit about that and some other things related to the industry is, of course, Mr. Steimler. So we'll give him the floor as the closer.
Thank you, Pete. Ladies and gentlemen, you will have noticed I did not thank Muraoka-san and for this venue. A photo has been put up on the wall. You will see there is a map of Yokohama, and there is a gentleman there who none of you will know. This captain, he called regularly to Yokohama in the late 40s and 50s. This captain, he went to sea at the age of 14. He went to sea first on a sailing vessel. He had to climb the rig to prove to get accepted by putting his belly on the topmast and just lying there without any secure lines whatsoever to be accepted. This captain became captain as early as in 1928, both on steam and diesel vessels. This captain he lived in Bergen on the west coast of Norway, and he had a smoking room in his house, which was a mini Japan. He brought back from Japan, after all the years he had spent in Yokohama and in the Bay of Tokyo, navigating his ships in and out of port, primarily reefer vessels. He took his grandson by the hand, because no one was allowed into that room other than him. The room was full of Japanese silk tapestry, samurai knives. It was full of china, vases. It was a mini Japan. And this captain, he took his grandchild on his lap, and he talked about his time at sea on a sailing vessel. He talked about the thousands of ship owners who disappeared when one transited from sail to steam. He talked about destinations, various destinations in the world. He talked about his Panama certificate, which was a 2-digit one. He talked about gradually his Suez Canal certificate. In general, he talked a lot about Japan, and he spent hours and hours and hours talking about Japan. This captain is Gustav A. Steimler. The little boy who was on his lap and was told all these stories was me. Now, you might find it difficult to see 0.11 tons standing here and sitting on his lap. I can assure you I was much smaller in those days when this happened. Muroka-san, I'm giving you this story because I think as a Steimler, coming back here now, being invited to speak, is a privilege, it's an honor. But I take with me, and I hope you can take with you, this little story as call it a token of our appreciation for what you and your staff have arranged for us over these two years. This gentleman, this captain, was surely around when the port of Yokohama turned 100 years. And 160 years as it is today, it is nice to be here and to be celebrating it with you. So thank you very, very much.
Great story.
With that, Muroka-san?
Excellent.
Thank you very much, Spain. I didn't expect such a nice story at the end of your session. And I really thank you for Peter, John, Spain, Captain Segar, Sasaki-san, Hashimoto-san, and Tom. This is a wonderful session, which I believe intrigued the audience with some optimism to use LNG as a marine fuel. However, please note, I didn't invite to this session people who are real skeptical to LNG or decarbonization fundamentalists, but it's okay. So you guys, that's a lovely LNG fan. But anyway, with this session, end of the session, today forum of YMF 2019 is now concluded. Thank you for everybody joining us this session. Or I really appreciate the moderators, speakers, session panelists for not only for this session but also the sessions today and yesterday. So I really thank you very much for the audience as well to participate in this forum. Thank you very much. And we also can talk various issues at Gala dinner, but those who are not attending Gala, I look forward to seeing you again at some occasion like this. Thank you very much.